It's funny, the whole relation and the comment about being a LaFleur. It's all fun and games until you realize that Guy Lafleur's son is also named Mark Lafleur, except for he's a criminal and he's in and out of jail all the time. So whenever I get introduced as Mark Lafleur, I kind of get the eyebrows raised every once in a while. So, all right, perfect. Okay, so I'm actually really happy to talk to you guys here today because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it's one that I don't get to talk about as much anymore. And there's a few reasons for that, some of which might be obvious. I think that when you look at something like Web3, a lot of people kind of roll their eyes and wonder what even is that. But the biggest issue right now is that there's kind of like a new hot neighbor on the block whenever it comes to technology. So a few years ago, Web3, blockchain, crypto, this was the hottest thing. And if you talked about changing the world and you talked about things that were exciting and what was going to happen, Web3 and blockchain was the main topic. But now we've got ChatGPT and all of these AI models that have kind of overshadowed the crypto space and the Web3 space and blockchain. And it's kind of obvious, you know, when we look at something like AI, this has the power to fundamentally change every aspect of our lives. And where Web3 was kind of considered that, it's hard to ignore what's going on today with AI. So that's number one, why I haven't been able to give this talk in a while. But number two, I think is more glaringly obvious, is that right now, if you try to talk to someone about Web3, there is only doom and gloom. Most people have lost a crap ton of money playing with crypto or investing in NFTs or trying to invest in blockchain. And it would seem that every single headline that's out there today has to do with some sort of major scam, whether it be something like, you know, people have lost all their money on some specific exchange. A lot of us have probably heard about what happened with FTX. But long story short, this is a space that is dealing with a lot of heat right now. And to be honest, I think it's a little bit unjust. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the space, and I think the reason that it's kind of going through this big trough right now is that, as with any new technology, people were focusing on the wrong things early on. And when you look at crypto and Web3, the first thing that you think of is people going ahead and taking $1,000, putting it on an exchange, buying some sort of asset they've never heard of, and turning it into $1 million in 2 days. Or the flip side, you start hearing people talk about how they bought a $500,000 picture of a monkey and have now sold it for $600,000 once again the next day. And that's where all the excitement in the space was coming from. It was a get-rich-quick scheme, and it very much was a scheme. And that's great, you know, congrats to the people that have done that. You know, you see all these kids driving around in Lambos now talking about how they have their crypto money. But at the end of the day, when you see all of this money rushing in from arguably people who have no idea what the hell they're talking about, you know it's a bubble. And in my opinion, that overshadowed the real value, which was the underlying technology and what we currently have today. So I want to go ahead and have this talk with you guys. I'm going to dive in, but I think kind of before getting into it, you probably want to know why you should listen to me about this type of stuff. So I'll kind of give you a quick little business background. I'm a little bit more than just Guy Lafleur's long lost son. I'm 32 years old. I went to the University of Waterloo, and I think that my main claim to fame would have been the fact that I co-founded a company called TrueLocal. So TrueLocal, some of you may have heard of it. We did online meat delivery. We were a D2C company through and through. So direct to consumer, we started in 2015, and we took an existing business model, which was essentially the idea of shipping food online, and brought it to a niche market. So this was like 2015 through to 2020. This is like the bloodbath days of direct to consumer business. Like, this was hyper competitive. Our entire business was trying to prove to people that our product was better than other people's product through branding, and then ideally trying to live up to that with the product and the service that we delivered. So lucky for us, great timing, great execution, and over the course of 5 years, we ended up growing the company. You know, as was mentioned, we're on the cover of the Globe and Mail for Canada's 14th top growing company. We expanded into Alberta, we expanded into BC, we did a little stint in the US as well, in Chicago, we expanded into Quebec. Like I mentioned, Dragon's Den, and then in 2020, we were actually acquired for almost $17 million. So pretty sweet. I was a kid who had holes in his shoes growing up, and when the company sold, we still had 75% ownership of it, so not too bad over the course of 5 years. And on top of that, it was actually 5 years to the day that the company sold. So I made a Facebook post on January 4th, 2016, saying I was quitting my job to start this company, wish me luck. And then January 4th, 2021, we actually announced the sale for $17 million. So that was a great run. And from that, it ended up parlaying into a book deal with Forbes, where I was able to kind of share my story on where I came from. And arguably one of the things that I think is most important which is as a first-time founder, we have an unrealistic view of what work-life balance is. So essentially, I'll kind of cut to the chase, but everybody thinks that work-life balance is great, which it is. But work-life balance is great when you have a career, you're at where you want to be. Work-life balance makes no sense if you're a first-time founder. And when you look at things like a pro athlete who, let's say, skips getting a part-time job or skips school to practice on their shot or ditches all their friends to go ahead and get extra practice in, it's like, oh my God, you're the best thing ever. Or if you look at like a billboard artist who, instead of paying rent, decides to take his money or her money and put it into more studio time, it's like, wow, that's real dedication. Or even like the military, people that give up being civilians to chase after something that's a bigger cause than them, we reward them and we recognize them for their sacrifice. But when it comes to being a founder, being a business, someone who is willing to do the same thing, we say, oh, you work too much. So I like to throw that out the window, got to write a book about it. And yeah, from there, if you think that's boring, then now I just drive race cars. So I'm actually a professional race car driver. I never had a car growing up, so there's probably a little something going on there where I became obsessed with cars. And my goal was that once I had the means to do so, I was going to take a stab at it. So at the age of 30, I bought my first race car. It's not this one, it's a previous one, a BMW. And we went to the track, and the idea was that if I could get faster than the people starting in their first year, then we'll make a run at really going racing. And that parlayed into a championship last year. And now this year, I do get to drive this car, and I drive a Mercedes AMG GT4. So for anybody here who's a car person, afterwards, please come and talk to me. I can talk your ear off about racing and motorsport. So, diving into it, I'll give you guys an idea of what I want to talk to you guys about here, okay? So, I want to acknowledge the fact that when it comes to Web3, it is very much like drinking water from a fire hose, okay? And the reason for this is twofold. Number one, there is a lot of technology involved, and it is, for the first time, arguably one of the things that moves so fast that it's almost impossible to keep up. And once again, blockchain being one of the bigger technical revolutions of our time, it's something that is moving at a speed that we're not really used to. You're seeing it now with AI, but it really did start 3 or 4 years ago when people started getting excited about blockchain. Trying to keep up with it is very, very, very difficult. So that's number one. But number two is that blockchain and Web3 has its own sort of little culture established with it. And if you're not in this culture, it's very difficult to break through, and the industry doesn't do itself any favors in the sense that they have their own terminology. So this terminology are words like a degen. Oh, I'm very excited. I've taken all my money, I've invested it in this asset I know nothing about, I've made a bunch of money now, I've lost a bunch of money now, I've made it again, congratulations, I'm a degen. Or something called a shitcoin. I'm gonna go ahead and 10x my money on something like a shitcoin. Now, not doing itself any favors by naming it these types of things. So to give you guys an idea, let's say you decide that you're like, I want to get into Web3, I'm interested. The first thing you start realizing, you see all these terms you've never heard of, and it gives no credibility to the space. So I always say that Web3 is like drinking water from a fire hose, and the idea of what Web3 essentially is Web3 is anything that has to do with things built on blockchain technology. Okay, so if you talk about blockchain, if you talk about crypto, if you talk about Bitcoin, Ethereum, if you talk about decentralized autonomous organizations, if you're talking about Bored Apes, any of these things fall under this Web3 category. Some of these things I'm going to touch on, but if you're wondering what Web3 is, it's all of those things. And to keep it even simpler, Web3 came after Web2, which came after Web1, which I will dive in for with you guys here. So when we go ahead and look at this title, I always say that if you're going to try to get into this space on your own, instead of trying to go broad and touching on all of these categories, it makes more sense to choose one thing that you're interested in the space, and then try to go deep on that. Because if you try to swallow all of this stuff as a whole, you're just going to get overwhelmed, and you're really just going to end up getting screwed and be like, I don't want to spend any time in here, especially because the rate of all the stuff is moving in terms of new information coming out. So for me, I started playing in this space seriously about 2 years ago, but I was dabbling in it probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I started off with this idea of blockchains and distributed ledgers, which is the technology. But I realized I'm not a technologist, I'm not technical, I can't code, I'm not spending time in this space. Then I went into the whole idea of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and cryptos, and I started doing day trading. Liked it was fine, but I'm not a finance guy, so I didn't spend time in that space either. Moved on from there, got into NFTs, and the idea of an NFT is essentially what you've probably heard of, which is these images that sell for a bunch of money, and I realized I'm not a creator, I'm not an artist, that's not the space for me, and eventually I landed on just understanding that, you know what, there's this idea of how to use these tools to build the businesses of tomorrow rather than being a specific expert on one of these, and that's what I kind of started dabbling in a little bit more. So I'm gonna go ahead, and the idea on this talk is that I'm gonna try to lay out to you the fundamentals of what Web3 is in a really basic, easy to understand term, easy to understand way. And I'm gonna do that by starting off with what blockchain actually is, what the technology is, and how you can relate it back to something that you guys probably know about, which is the internet. So from there, I wanna build on that and give you guys an idea of the philosophies behind Web3. Why is Web3 relevant? Why do people think that these could be the businesses of tomorrow? And where does the value actually come from and what makes it different? And the thing is that a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to understand it, and they think that it's much more confusing than it really is. The thing is, it's actually so simple that people overcomplicate it a lot, and it becomes confusing. So the idea is I want to explain the technology to you guys. Then what I want to do is kind of layer on some of the philosophies and the theories behind why this technology is considered valuable. And then from there, I want to go ahead and do the whole premise of the talk, which is how this all can come together to create the businesses of tomorrow. So that's what we're going to do. And in true fashion, like I mentioned, all these words you've probably never heard of before, I want to kick it off with something that is called skeuomorphism. Has anybody heard of this before? Okay, perfect. So this actually isn't a Web3 term, but for those of you here that are in the private equity or startup space or venture capital, you guys probably know Andreessen Horowitz. If not, they're one of the largest, most prestigious VC firms out in the Valley. They've invested in some of the biggest companies. They're kind of considered the pioneers of new technology. So they've spun off a fund called A16Z. And what A16Z does is they focus exclusively on Web3 and crypto. Now, a man in there called Chris Dixon, who's one of the GPs of the fund, brought this word skeuomorphism, which isn't exclusive to Web3, but brought it into Web3 space and made it a little bit more mainstream in the sense that skeuomorphism is when you see a new emerging technology comes out, the idea is that this new technology is going to change the world. This is going to create something that couldn't exist before, and it's going to create the billion-dollar companies of tomorrow. And it's very exciting, and it's why founders like myself get excited in this space. You're seeing it right now with AI. However, the problem is that what happens when these new technologies come out is instead of it revolutionizing the world, all we do is take existing business models and copy them over to this new technology. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we can build $100 million companies, over the course of a year, or, get them started over the course of a year by doing things like that. Because there's nothing wrong with taking a new technology and taking an existing business model and making it better and faster and cheaper and more efficient. But that's not why we're getting into this space, and it's not innovation. We're literally just copying and pasting things over. And I think a good example to look at would be the internet, when you look at the internet. So if you look at the internet, when the internet first came out, it had all of this promise. People were so excited about it. It was gonna provide people with the means to change their lives, completely revolutionize the world. And when you look at it today, I'm assuming that none of you can imagine a world without the internet. But the biggest, most exciting use cases for the internet early on were taking print information and putting it online so you could read it online. That's really all it was. So that was not the promise that we had when the internet came out. And that's a very skeuomorphic way of looking at the internet. So what we get excited about when we talk about finding businesses that are non-skeuomorphic are businesses that could not exist before this technology came out. So true innovation, and that's where the power of these technologies come from, is that now this technology is out, and we've tinkered around with it enough, and we've made it user-friendly enough, we've made it accessible enough, and we've brought in enough developers and investors and consumers that now we are creating ideas and business models that we never could have imagined before. So that's kind of the holy grail. So as a founder, we're always looking for, okay, this technology exists, but why am I using this technology versus using something that already exists? Is there something that this technology can do that is making it so that other technologies did not allow this business to work before? Once again, most people just focus on copy and paste over this sort of business idea, over to this new technology. So I think the place to start is actually understanding what this technology is. Okay, and my hope here is that I'm going to do this as simply as possible and try to avoid a lot of technical terms to give you guys an idea. So, blockchain. I'm assuming people here have heard of blockchain before? Yeah? A little bit. Does anybody here really feel like they understand what blockchain is? Anybody? Okay. So, blockchain is actually really simple because it's so boring. So, what blockchain essentially is instead of taking data and storing it on one computer or one location or one source of truth or having one person have control over it, what blockchain has enabled is for us to take that data and store it amongst many different devices that choose to host this data. All right? So you're probably wondering, like, what does that even mean and why do I care? Well, when you look at something like, let's say, Amazon, obviously Amazon is storing their data in many different servers, in many different locations. But the thing to understand is that we are all beholden to Amazon because they are the single administrator and they are the single source of truth. And if Amazon were to decide to make a change, there's nothing anybody could do about it. They don't need anybody's permission because they own all of the servers, they own all the devices that this data is stored on. So even though they might say things like, oh, we have cross checks and balances for that, at the end of the day, you have to trust that Amazon will not do anything weird with that information or data. And this data can be anything, okay? Don't get too caught up in the nitty-gritty, like what is this data in fact? Is it a ledger? Is it spreadsheets? Is it, videos? It's just the idea that anything can be stored on multiple devices. And the idea that blockchain enables us to store data on multiple devices is great because it creates a situation where not one person can have full control, and if somebody does try to go in and mess with something, then all of the other devices on the network will know and say, hey, listen, you've tried to change something, we don't all approve, so no, it's not going to work. You would have to affect 51% of these devices to make a change actually happen. So it's this idea of this trustlessness. And I always hate that term, so when we go back to this idea of Web3 kind of gatekeeping the industry by using these horrible terms, I would never trust something that's called trustless. But the concept is that trustlessness means that you don't have to trust the entity in the middle. You can believe in the code, and there's not one person that is going to be able to control anything. So blockchain gives us this trustlessness. So once again, I'm like, what? Like, so what? Well, let's compare it to the internet. Does anybody here really know what the internet is? Deeply. Like, really, can you describe to me the internet? Maybe a couple people, but probably not. But you know the internet affects every single aspect of your life. You know that you couldn't live without it. You know that all the apps and the browsers that you use run on the internet, but you don't know what the internet is. That's because the internet has evolved to a point where it's so easy to use that now you just think of the use cases rather than what the technology actually is. And all the internet is the ability to connect a bunch of devices together. That's it. So if you look at the internet as the ability to connect a bunch of different devices together, look at blockchain as the ability to store data on a bunch of different devices. It's that simple. It's not this huge rocket science thing. So when we start looking at the internet as this ability to connect devices together, and we start looking at blockchain as the ability to store all these different devices, the dream of blockchain is that eventually there will be this killer application, something that's going to come out that makes this technology relevant and useful. So we don't try to sit around and be like, oh, I don't like blockchain because I don't understand it. That's like saying you don't like the internet because you don't understand it. I don't even understand the internet, but I know how to use it. So blockchain is essentially this concept of distributed ledger technology. You're just distributing information across multiple devices, and blockchain is like the branded name of that. It's the underlying technology. So now when we start looking at it, when you start talking about this sort of killer application, what's the next iteration of this technology? Let's look at the internet. Okay, back in the day, the internet came out, and we could connect a bunch of different devices together. Great, who cares? What does it do? Well, a bunch of smart people started realizing, wow, we can send messages to one another with this technology. And then you start getting into something like email. And people start realizing, oh shit, this is actually really powerful. I can start sending emails. So when you look at early web browsers and you look at email, these are the early use cases for this technology. And it was still sketchy back in the day. Like, it was still difficult to send a message to a person. It wasn't like it was this seamless sort of thing where you could just receive a message. It took a lot of time. So blockchain has been waiting for its killer moment for a long time now. And the way to look at it is that when it came hard. And I'm sure most of you guys have heard of it, but in my opinion, when the internet brought people email, blockchain brought people a new currency. At the end of the day, the #1 killer app that came out for blockchain technology, when they said, hey, listen, what does the ability to distribute data amongst a bunch of different devices mean? It means we can create a new currency with this. And then you enter Bitcoin. So most of you probably know Bitcoin. Maybe a lot of you don't know the deep understandings of what Bitcoin works or why people care, but it really kind of goes back to the financial system. And because when Bitcoin came out, it was absolutely on the fringes. Like, this wasn't a bunch of mainstream people that are like, hey, here's a useful use case. It was people in the shadows. It was people that are like, hey, listen, we can really make a global impact and give people the means to empower themselves with this technology. So some of you may know, but some of you may not. I don't have the exact stat off the top of my head, but it is something crazy. It's in this realm that 2/3 of the population don't have a bank account, like the global population. And we can't even imagine that here because it just doesn't make sense. But when you look at it globally, the financial system is very, very difficult to access. And even when you do look at it locally, you have to take a second. We've gotten used to it. But the idea of, hey, how much money do you have? Let's say you got a few $100,000 in the bank. Well, I always like to ask people, well, who owns that money? And you'll say, well, I own it. It's kind of questionable because really the bank owns it. And really what you do is you go to the bank and say, hey, can I please get my money back? And the bank, most of the time, hopefully all the time, says, yeah, no problem, we'll give you your money back. But when things hit the fan, there is a reality where you might not be able to get your money. And once again, controversial topic, but just recently in Canada, there's a situation where if you supported a trucker convoy, you didn't get to access your money anymore. So we talk about these sort of scenarios where it's like, oh, that's crazy, that this will never happen. But once again, it has happened. So the idea of Bitcoin came about to say, hey, listen, first of all, for all of the people who don't have banking services, you can use this blockchain technology and this currency that we created to access money anywhere. On top of that too, in things like North America, you're no longer being gatekept by the bank, where you have to pay a fee for every single thing that you do. And when you look at things like SWIFT, and you look at things like these monetary networks, these are the biggest industries out there. They're pulling in trillions of dollars in revenue. People just don't seem to know it. But the idea of trying to send money to someone, like if I want to send USD to a person, it's very, very difficult to do that. I gotta go to the exchange, I gotta have the bank stamp and approve it. The whole idea of Bitcoin was here to circumvent that. And people that really believe in Bitcoin think that it is the new form of currency. And at minimum, if it's not the new form of currency, it is definitely this replacement for gold. There's only ever going to be 21 million, so it's not like we can print a bunch of it. You can't tamper with it, because once again, if someone tries to hack it, you would have to hack every single device that supports the network, which is just not feasible. It was really built as this be-all, end-all replacement for currency. Now, whether you believe that or not, it doesn't matter what side you're on. I actually don't think it's a replacement for currency. There's a lot of limitations with Bitcoin, but I do think it's a great store of value and could arguably be this idea of digital gold. But whether you believe in it or not, this toy, this thing in the shadows, did pull up a $1.3 trillion market cap at its peak. Doesn't matter where it's at today, this technology, this blockchain, the first major use case of this technology ended up being worth $1.3 trillion. So you gotta stop and take a look. So a lot of people get confused and they think Bitcoin is blockchain, blockchain is Bitcoin, what is this? And blockchain is not Bitcoin, Bitcoin is not blockchain. That would be like saying email is the internet and the internet is email. All right? The internet enabled email the same way that blockchain enabled Bitcoin. And that's really it. And Bitcoin being this first sort of major killer use case of the technology. So a lot of people also say that, and it gets confusing where it's like, oh, blockchain is the new internet, and people get excited about it, and it's not. They're completely separate, they're completely independent. But people get excited about blockchain technology because they say it could have the same sort of impacts that the internet had for us. So that's kind of this early stage of the technology, this early stage of Bitcoin. I had to go ahead and bring a little bit of ChatGPT in here because I feel like you can't give a talk nowadays unless you bring in some sort of AI component. So if you guys want, you got the ChatGPT description of what Bitcoin is. But now it's like, where do we go from here? And the idea of Bitcoin, I'm not going to go super deep into it, but the idea of Bitcoin is when I send it to you, it sends a token. Okay, what's a token, you might ask? A token is just a unique identifier online. I'm not going to go into the specifics of it, but just understand that if I send it to you, there's a token, it's unique, everybody knows what it is, it can't be copied, it can't be duplicated, it's a unique token. It exists for a long time now. It's not like tokens are new. You use tokens when you sign on to things. If I send you 0.2 Bitcoins, it's a different token, all right? So what started happening is Bitcoin came out and people started looking at it and saying, okay, well, seeing as Bitcoin is code at the end of the day, can't we make it better? Like, can't we make this code do things? And once again, if you want to go ahead and take a look at the evolution of the internet, it's very similar to when the internet came out, email came out, websites came out. We took print media and put it online, and it was this be-all and all. Very skeuomorphic, but it was very exciting. But then as more people spent more time with it, they realized they could make it better. So they developed coding languages, like things like JavaScript and HTML. Whether you know it or not, it doesn't matter, but what it did is it made it so that these web pages weren't just things that you read. Now, you could implement buttons. You could embed a video. You could actually make these websites do things. And that's a massive innovation. Because now it's not this idea of just reading a website, you can make this website do other things. And essentially this concept led us to the world of where we're at today, where we have browsers and applications and all these different things. So now we look at blockchain. Blockchain technology has enabled Bitcoin. Bitcoin's here, Bitcoin's cool, we like Bitcoin. But Bitcoin could be better. Why can't we make it so that we can code on top of Bitcoin? So instead of sending just a coin or a token to you, we can make it do things. Now, to give you a quick little history, 10 seconds here, that got super controversial. Because the people that created Bitcoin think Bitcoin is perfect. You cannot mess with Bitcoin, nor should you mess with Bitcoin. Bitcoin did not exist to be user-friendly. Bitcoin did not exist to be coded upon or made better. Bitcoin exists to replace money. And if you speak anything outside of that, you're like this anarchist and it's crazy rebelling. So people that really believe in Bitcoin do not want Bitcoin to become better or different or anything. They're very happy with Bitcoin being this perfect representation of digital gold. Doesn't matter what side you're on, just know that that's the case. So innovators came out and they're like, hey, listen, this idea of sending a token on blockchain that can't be tampered with, we can make it better by coding on top of it. And one of the most prominent, tokens that came out was Ethereum. So you've probably heard of Ethereum. Have people here heard about Ethereum before? Has anybody not heard about Ethereum? Okay, so we have an idea of what it is. Ethereum essentially built on the concept of blockchain building Bitcoin, Bitcoin now being able to code on top of Bitcoin. So they created Ethereum, and the idea is that not only can I now use blockchain to send you currency, to send you value, but I can code on top of that to make it do things as well. So if I send you a token, not only is it this digital thing that shows up in your bank account that says you have money, I can attach an image to that as well. Or I can attach some sort of digital good to that. Or I can make it so that when it arrives in your possession, some action occurs, some trigger happens. And the idea of coding on top of these tokens essentially is the idea of a smart contract. And some of you might have heard about smart contracts before, and once again, it gets confusing for no reason. These aren't actually contracts. Smart contracts are essentially just the idea that you can code on top of these tokens. You can make them do things. So the same way that the internet came out and gave us the internet, and it allowed us to read on the internet, and then JavaScript and HTML made it so we could interact with that internet, is the exact same way that blockchain gave us Bitcoin, blockchain gave us Ethereum, and then blockchain eventually gave us Ethereum that had smart contracts. We can now code and make these tokens do things. So the purpose of Ethereum is not just to be a new form of currency. The purpose of Ethereum is to be the ecosystem for innovators to come and create applications and new use cases on this technology. You can almost look at it, to keep it simple, as the new app store. So people can come and use these tokens and make them do things. And now you've got yourself where people are creating these decentralized applications. Okay? So that's this whole value behind Ethereum. And the way to look at it is that I always used to get confused, like, what is it Bitcoin, is it Ethereum? What about all these other tokens? Okay? You've probably heard of all these other ones. You've probably, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, maybe you've heard of Cardano, maybe you've heard of Dogecoin, you know, you've probably heard of Shiba Inu, and it just gets dumber and dumber and dumber as you go down the line. Once again, there's their own culture in the crypto space. But really, the ability to code on top of these tokens has made an entire ecosystem where there are some very valuable businesses that are being created on top of this technology. All right, so the way that I look at it is like this, to keep it simple. All right, if you go ahead and look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is on its own little island. Bitcoin is not like any of the other cryptocurrencies. And cryptocurrencies are pretty much every token you can think of. You've got Bitcoin, you've got Ethereum, and then arguably all of the other tokens are just called altcoins, ALT. They're just alternative coins and tokens. And the way to look at it is that Bitcoin is like digital gold over here doing its own thing. Nobody owns it, nobody's in control of it, nobody even knows who created it, and it can't be tampered with. That is the full expression of blockchain. It's this trustless, decentralized technology. But once again, there are better things you can do with it. Enter Ethereum. Ethereum is a business. Don't let everyone fool you. And all of these other tokens are also businesses. All right? So the best way to look at it, if you want to understand this, is that Bitcoin is like digital gold, and Ethereum and all the other tokens are like the stock market. It's the best way to look at it, to keep it simple. Any token you can think of is essentially a team that is out there saying, hey, listen, we have this really interesting use case for blockchain technology, and if you want to invest in us, just buy our token. It literally is the stock market for crypto. And when it comes to investing, I'm definitely not giving investment advice, but the best thing you can do is just look at these tokens and understand that it's a business, look who the founding team is, what's their use case, what are they claiming to do with technology, because all of these other tokens are claiming to do something. They all think that they can use blockchain better than Bitcoin or Ethereum, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of this whole idea of crypto, this whole idea of Bitcoin, and this whole idea of how blockchain has enabled these things. And once again, it's just very similar to the internet. The internet came out and it allowed us to connect with one another. Sounds super boring, sounds super lame. What does that even mean? Once again, you had the same talk back in the day. You'd sit there and be like, so what? Great, I can connect with you, who cares? It's very similar to saying, so what? I can distribute my data amongst a bunch of different devices, who cares? Well, once again, $1.3 trillion, and a lot of businesses and investment are out here creating apps and all this type of stuff on the technology. So the last thing I want to touch on real quickly, in terms of something to understand when it comes to this, is the idea of ownership. Okay? So this is a really, really, really important part of Bitcoin and Web3 and why people get excited about it. Once again, this is something that is really, really simple to understand, but because it's so simple, people want to dig into it and think that there's something bigger. But the thing that people get really excited about with blockchain is the idea that you own everything that you have when it comes to playing in Web3. Whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Ethereum, whether it's an NFT, whether it's any of this stuff, you own it. And that's really, really important, because that is almost the entire premise of why you want to spend time in Web3, is because now you can actually invest in digital things and not have to worry about Facebook shutting you down. You're the one who owns it. So I'll give you guys an example. These wallets are what allows you to accept these digital tokens. Any digital token. Could be Bitcoin, could be an NFT. And people will automatically think, okay, well, what happens if these wallet companies go out of business? I own this wallet, and this wallet allows me to hold these digital tokens. Well, let's go ahead and play that out. So one of the most popular wallets is MetaMask. They're an online wallet, and you create a wallet, and it allows you to hold these digital tokens. Now, the thing to understand here is that the wallet does not, in fact, hold your token, okay? Instead, what happens is your tokens and all of your assets are on the blockchain. So once again, we talk about this blockchain technology. And the idea is that when you use a website, if you go to www.marklafleur.com, do you actually think you're going to marklafleur.com? Absolutely not. That is a nickname URL that you are typing in because it's easier than typing in IP address 18623 or whatever. All right? When you go to marklafleur.com and if you click on something or fill out a form, do you think that you're actually typing in the letters and then just clicking a form and it goes away? Absolutely not. What's happening is you are using shortcuts that tell the database to, okay, bring this information in and spit this information out. And once again, all it is a user interface that has allowed us to do this. So very similar to the internet, that's what's happening with these wallets and blockchain. So instead of you accessing the blockchain, which you can do, and going in there and carving out your own little vault that nobody can tamper with, and saying, hey, I've got this little vault, and creating your keys to access that vault, what happens is you can use this wallet that will do those things for you. And that's how you would do it. But the question then becomes, well, once again, what happens when this wallet goes out of business? You say, I own it. Well, what happens if this wallet goes under? No problem. The interesting thing about these wallets is that you get a set of keys. And once again, to keep it very simple, we're just going to call them private keys. It's essentially like your passwords. And your coins and your assets are not held with the wallet. The wallet is just allowing you to interact with the blockchain. So if this wallet goes under, and they go out of business tomorrow, no problem. You take your keys, and you go to any other wallet that you want, and it'll allow you to access the blockchain, and your currency is all still there. It's very different than the bank. As a lot of us probably know, Silicon Valley Bank has gone under, and luckily, FDIC insurance is coming to save the day, but if it didn't, a lot of friends in the Valley and a lot of people that couldn't make payroll. So imagine a scenario where it's like the bank goes under, you can just go to another bank, and the bank says, no problem, we got your cash here ready for you. That's kind of the concept here, all right? So this idea of digital ownership is very, very, very important, okay? And we can go into the details of it, I can do an entire talk on how wallets work and all that, but that's all you really need to know is that you own the things that you have online, and as long as you have your passwords, you can access all the things that you need to access, all right? So I know I'm short a little bit of time here, so I'm gonna kind of plow through this, but I do want to talk about the main point of this, which at the end of the day is the theory behind Web3 and why it's important. So we've got Web 1. Web 1 is this idea of the early internet where you would take information and put it online and be able to read it, okay? And it's not that exciting, but at the time, it was new, it was amazing. Print magazine, once again, we now see situations where you can go ahead and reach a massive audience without having to actually do the hard cost of printing the magazine. So very skeuomorphic, but we made a lot of businesses bigger, faster, better, all right? So the idea of Web 1 when the internet first came out was very much read-only. You go online and you read what's on there, okay? So what happened from there is we ended up going down the line where we started making the internet better. Like I talked about, you can now code on the internet, you can now make it so that these websites are interactive, and boom, by making these websites interactive, we are at where we currently are at today, which is Web 2. And the idea of being able to interact with these websites is the concept of being able to read and write. That's just kind of how we summarize it. So Web 1 was read only, Web 2 is read and write. And once again, we live in a Web 2 world now. The ability to code with these websites, and the ability to create apps and mobile apps has given us everything from streaming services to social media, not skeuomorphic. The idea of social media did not exist before the internet. The idea of what social media even could be did not exist before the internet, and neither did streaming. All right? So we currently live in a Web 2 world today. And finally, when we start looking at what Web 3 brings to the table, it is a world where you can read, write, and own. And that's where things start to get exciting. And once again, if you just simplify it, I think one of the best ways to look at it is essentially this idea of, let's say, What's irrelevant? Anybody here have kids who play Fortnite? Yeah? Okay. Any of them use your credit cards to buy things on Fortnite? Yeah? Okay. So, when you go buy something on Fortnite, you buy a skin, okay? You pretty much will go and buy characters and buy weapons. It's great, but when you invest in that, you can never get anything back out because the game owns it. When you put your credit card in there and you buy something, it doesn't go into your own little vault, it goes into the game's vault. And there's nothing wrong with that, it just could be better. And when you think about a world where anything that you buy digitally, you could own indefinitely, that's where things start to get exciting. And that's really what gave us this whole kind of era of NFTs. And once again, the idea of NFTs, as you probably know them, is this $500,000 JPEG. It's an image, that someone created, and if you buy it, you're part of this exclusive group. I literally have friends who can sell their Rolex to buy a Bored Ape. It blows my mind. And I'm someone who loves Web3. And in my opinion, NFTs are dead until we stop calling them NFTs. Because the idea of this non-fungible token, this idea of owning a picture and having it be worth something, doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you start to think radically about how the idea of digital ownership could expand to something like a driver's license or an identification, you start to see how things could really change here once this becomes adopted. And one of the things to think about is, once again, if most of the population doesn't have a bank account, most of the population doesn't have an identification. A lot of people don't have birth certificates. So this type of technology absolutely can help change that across the board and give people ownership of that technology. So the idea here of read plus write, read plus own, is where we start to get away from this concept of skeuomorphism. Okay? So we get ourselves in a situation where social media, like I said before, is something that did not exist prior to the internet and the ability to code on the internet. All right? So I'm going to kind of run through some of this stuff really quickly here, but the one thing I want to kind of bring to your attention is, what do some of these businesses look like in the future? All right? And this is a thought experiment. These are my opinions. There's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions on where this business is going, but I love playing in this space, and I do think that there is a ton of opportunity when you look at the underlying technology. Take the speculative value out of it, but what is this technology going to enable? And let's go ahead and talk about something like social media. I know it's a bit of a change of pace to what you guys usually talk about, but it's still relevant, and I think it's going to affect a lot of people. So if we look at social media, let's talk about these wallets. Your wallets hold all of your tokens across the board. And the reason they're called wallets is because early on they would hold all of your cryptocurrencies. So it's a wallet. But as soon as we started being able to code on top of this technology, on top of these tokens, well, now I can have Ethereum, or I can have a token that has an image attached to it. It could be a display picture. If I'm a content writer, it could be my videos. It could be a blog that I write. I own that in my wallet. Nobody can take it from me. You might wonder, well, who cares about that? Like, what's the big deal? Well, there's a couple things. Number one, if you want to think of a world where we look at Web3 and social media, you can see what's in other people's wallets. And I have a little talk on how that's good and bad, but I'm going to skip over that for now. I'm happy to talk to you about it after. But the idea is that, in my opinion, social media is changing completely, because social media might not exist, in the sense that now, if I want to know anything about you, I'm just going to go look at your public wallet, because you're going to hold all the things that you find interesting in that wallet. It could be your blog posts, it could be your videos, and really social media has just become going and browsing other people's wallets. If I want to be friends with you, I can see that you're into the same things that I'm into. It's very interesting. But to take it one step further, there's this war going on right now between Web3 and Web2. Because a lot of people in the Web3 space despise Web2. And they think that it's predatory, and they think that it does no good, and it's just these giant organizations that are bloated with value. Now, I'm not necessarily on that side, because when I look at Web2, so once again, the internet as we know it today, social media, streaming services, the reason they get mad about it is that they say that if someone's becoming a millionaire on YouTube, which is, by the way, amazing, like this wasn't something that existed 20 years ago, like a kid could go and become a millionaire. Like the ability to earn financially thanks to Web2, YouTube, Facebook, social media is incredible. But the argument is that if you're making $1 million, they're making 20 million. or 100 million. And that the real value is not being given to the creator. The real value is being hoarded away in these organizations. And the example is this. You go and build up 1 million followers on Twitter. Then you get banned from Twitter. What happens? All of that value is gone. YouTube. So why can't I export my users? Why don't I own that relationship? Okay, so YouTube. I talk to content creators all the time. Luckily, I'm in the content business now with driving race cars. It makes for a lot of cool content. So I'm always dealing with videographers, content creators. And one of the things that they always talk about, I love challenging them on this, because I'm like, okay, well, who owns your video? Oh, I own it. Okay. So I go and look at their YouTube and I see they have, 20,000 followers and this video has 1 million views. I'm like, oh, great, congratulations. So, question for you, what's gonna happen if you ever get kicked off of YouTube? Or just YouTube decides to demonetize or downvote or whatever your video? Like, okay, well, it doesn't matter. If they take it off, I still own the file. Oh, you own the file. Okay, congratulations. I hate to break it to you, but the only reason your video has value isn't because of the content of the video. It's not because you own the file. It's because of the 10,000 comments you have and that little ticker that says you have 1 million views. That's the only reason there's value in the video. So why don't you own that video? Why does YouTube own that video? So that's the argument that's coming out right now, is that a lot of content creators are saying that I go ahead and I create an account and I upload all of my stuff to you and give you all of my content and you get more value than I do. Now once again, I'm on the side that, listen, quit complaining. The only reason you're popular is because YouTube's algorithm is going and distributing this content to people. If you posted it on your website, you might get the same discoverability. But there's absolutely conversations happening in that space on how social media is going to start to get disrupted. And what I think social media could look like in the future, instead, is you will own all of your assets and all of your videos and all of your blogs and all of your content in your wallet. Only you can control your wallet. And what's going to happen with these social media platforms is instead of you creating an account and uploading all of your content into that account, instead, the smart social media companies are going to realize that people are just going to stop doing that. They're going to upload it to their wallet. And this more non-skeuomorphic idea is that social media will become bare bones and just be the algorithm. It won't be uploading all the content. It will be this thing that you can connect your wallet into, and then it will access your contacts, it'll access your followers, and it'll access your videos, it'll access your images, it'll access your blogs, and it'll distribute it to people if you so feel. And if you don't want to be with that social media platform anymore, you want to plug your wallet and go to the next one. And that's this idea of digital ownership. And that's where the power comes from. So I'm running a little tight on time here, so what I do want to run through, there is this concept that I would love to talk to you guys about at some point, called a decentralized autonomous organization. Listen, once again, such a fancy word for absolutely nothing. It is the idea of an online community. Okay, a real decentralized autonomous organization, they're not really around yet. But what people get excited about with this idea of a DAO is essentially just an online community that has a shared bank account. And to be part of this community, you have to buy in to this community. And the money that you spend buying into this community goes into that shared bank account, and then you, as a token holder, get to vote on how that organization or community deploys that capital. And there's a lot of interesting things that are happening, and just understand this. You might look at this and be like, that's Mickey Mouse, how's that actually gonna work? There are deep governance procedures being brought out in this space to figure out how to manage these, because immediately you're like, how are we gonna vote on things? There's too many people, all this type of stuff. It's gotten really sophisticated. It's actually quite exciting. So at some point, if anybody wants to talk about that, more than happy to dive in. But long story short, so look, why should you care? Okay? I know that it's easy to kind of look at Web3 right now and be like, isn't that just full of scams and stupid pictures and stuff? And yeah, it absolutely is. But that's because this technology is so early. It's so early. We only have a few use cases with this technology. So to discount the entirety of this space because of a few years of down, like I'm sure a lot of you guys are here in the 2000s. The biggest companies we've ever had came out through that time. Just look at Amazon. All right, so why should you care? This is hands down one of my favorite videos I think of all time, and I think it kind of really hammers home the point But
You know anything about that? Sure. What the hell is that exactly?
Well, it's become a place where people are publishing information.
Right.
So everybody can have their own homepage, companies are there, the latest information. It's wild what's going on. You can send electronic mail to people. It is the big new thing.
Yeah, but you know, it's easy to criticize something you don't fully understand, which is my position here.
Go ahead.
But I can remember a couple of months ago, there was like a big breakthrough announcement that on the internet or on some computer deal, they were going to broadcast a baseball game. You could listen to a baseball game on your computer. And I just thought to myself, does radio ring a bell? You know what I mean?
There's a difference. You can listen to the baseball game whenever you want.
Right. Do tape recorders ring a bell?
for those of you that don't know, that's Bill Gates. Imagine being the guy laughing at Bill Gates and his new technology. But personally, that's where we're at today with blockchain. I really think that this is something that when you look deep at what's going on, it is very much just scratching the surface. We're still dealing with a lot of skeuomorphic businesses that are just trying to copy and paste over existing business models onto the tech. But as it becomes more user-friendly and as more people spend time in the space, we're gonna start seeing the businesses of tomorrow. So I appreciate you guys having me here. Thank you. I know it's the end of the day. Hopefully kept you a little bit engaged, but if you guys wanna connect, would love to connect with you guys and chat more about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Correct me, and I could be totally off base here, but when you talked about the shift from Web 2 to Web 3 and the big issue being the change to ownership, what was running through my mind was the sports franchise. 20, 30 years ago, the owner had all the power, but it was the player who was really bringing everybody in and making the owner money. And what we've seen is that sort of change now where the players really understand that they are the ones making the money, and they now have that ownership, and they are now reaping the rewards of their actual work, which they weren't in the past. Is that analogy a fair one?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, another way to look at it would be music creators and their labels.
Right.
So what's happening now is that historically, you used to have, if you created music, you would have to have a label that would come and do the marketing for you and sell the product and do all this. So similarly with an athlete, if they don't have the marketing of the team behind them, they can't make any cash. But really what's happening now is with blockchain and this idea of NFTs and these tokens, what's happening is you're starting to see these content creators, you're starting to see athletes create their own digital products and sell it directly to their fans. So now you could have 1 million followers, and even when you had 1 million followers, you used to have to work with a label or let's say a sports team to sell your product. Now you got 1 million followers, you just say, hey, look, I'm selling this piece of music, and that's what's happening right now. Drake, I think Tory Lanez put out albums as NFTs. And you're starting to see that all this technology is doing is really cutting out the middleman. The idea of trustlessness. You do not have to trust this intermediary anymore. So sports franchises are huge. Blockchain and Web3 is really changing how the people are valuing sports teams, and it's much more, like historically sports teams have lost a lot of money unless it's the major sports. But now they're becoming media empires because people are taking this and turning them into NFTs or using blockchain to sell their assets. And once again, you can look at the NBA with Top Shots is doing it right now. So it's a perfect example.
Yeah, I like everything except when you said cut out the middleman, because that's kind of what everybody in this room is doing. But no, I understand it. And I mean, most of us are all going down our own digital path, moving our businesses forward, and it'd be interesting to see which one of us really take advantage of what you said, going from 2 to 3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very enlightening.